I'm Al Bledsoe, Veterans of 4 and More, Post 1108, Richmond, Indiana.
I'm Ron Chappell, Chaplain for Vietnam Veterans Association 777 here in Richmond, and we welcome you to Proudly We Serve.
And as always, we're going to go around the room, and we have two distinguished gentlemen with us today, and we'd like them to introduce themselves and just give us a brief history of what they've done and what they are now doing.
I'm Steve Kuykendall, and I'm here because I'm on the Congress to Campus program, which the Association of Former Members of Congress sponsors, and we visit college campuses in pairs of a Republican and a Democrat, and do programs like this, visit with students in their classroom, have town hall meetings, all of that, and we've been here now for a day and a half, so we've seen a whole lot of your campus and your community, and they've come and talked to us.
That's great.
My previous life, I served in Congress, I served in the state legislature in California. I was also a local councilman and mayor in my community before that. And in my earliest career, I thought I was going to make a career of the Marine Corps. So I spent the first 7 years of my life as a Marine after I left college, and had a couple of trips to Vietnam in that time period, and ended up being retired on a disability retirement because I got hurt. So that's kind of my gamut.
Okay.
Again, my name is David Minge, and I'm from Minnesota. I represented a rural congressional district in that state. Steve is the Republican in our team, and I'm the Democrat. We get along very well together. We see eye to eye on most things. My background is in the legal system. I both taught and practiced law, and served in Congress and served as an appellate judge. And I just recently retired as an appellate judge, and now I'm actively being a grandfather and doing some volunteer work in my area. My prior experience is not nearly as extensive as Steve's. I was on the local school board for 3 or 4 years, and then went to Congress. But we've had a rich and a very interesting experience in Congress, and certainly working on veterans matters was an important part of our work.
Right.
Well, thank you both for your service, and we're really just happy to have you both here today. I've got to bring this up before we start anything, is the fact that Villanova did win the game last night.
They did. I saw that three-pointer from about 10 feet outside the three-point ring.
That was all meant to happen.
It was all net.
Yeah, all meant to happen. All meant to happen. So we got that important thing out of the way. Now we can go on with our discussion.
Well, that certainly dated this program.
I was going to say with the rest of the life. You know?
Let me ask you a question that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds, is where have we gone with this thing with helping veterans and our country in general? Are we gone too far with this thing? Can we get it fixed? Is it fixable? You guys have more insight than we do. Steve, do you want to lead to that?
I must tell you, I left active service in 1973 after a pretty good little run there, but I left and went into the VA system because I had been injured. I had a disability retirement, and I ended up being a disability through the VA. And I thought my care was pretty good then, although I didn't have much of it. But for the veteran of that war, I think for us, we served in a time period when the country didn't know quite how to deal with the anger, and they were taking it out on the veterans who weren't necessarily having a choice. They were volunteering, or they were going to fight a war at the country's behest, the leadership's behest.
Yes.
And so I know as I look back on it now, the country's gotten much better. They have a very, very, very small segment of our population currently serves in the military, less than 1%, if you include all the volunteers and all the reserve and National Guard in it of our population. But that less than 1%, we've exercised them very hard. And today, it is very common, and I think I think you fellows, if you're a Vietnam veteran era, you've taken it upon yourself to say, you can't ever treat veterans like you treated us. And so I'm pleased to see how the public has responded, and they have now made it a mission of theirs. And you'll see people you've never expected. They'll see me because I've got my Marine Corps hat on or something, and thank me for the time I spent.
Well, certainly my experience is that the commitment by virtually every member of Congress is to honor the commitments that were made to veterans, and that this is a budget item that should not be compromised. Unfortunately, sometimes there have been demands on the VA system that have exceeded its capacity, and it has not been adequately funded. Certain types of situations, I think at one point Agent Orange was a controversy. Was
Yes.
this really having the impact? Was the post-traumatic stress syndrome something that was a reality? And I think we've come to recognize that these really are problems and that we should be taking responsibility for them, and that we have homeless veterans, we
Yes.
have suicide issues, and that these are all matters that need attention and need coverage. And my impression is that Congress is committed. I have not been in Congress for 15 years, so I'm a little removed from
Right.
the day-to-day activity and the politics of it at this point.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes if some folks in that position take a kind of pragmatic view of the budget and looking at this 1% and wondering, do they really deserve any significant portion of what's available for their cause? You understand what I'm saying? I wonder about that sometime, if that's what's going on, and so they want to divert those funds somewhere else that they feel or demand more need or assistance financially.
I think the veterans segment of our budget is getting more attention now than maybe it got for, say, 10 or 15 years, especially going through the 80s and early 90s. And after the first Persian Gulf War, we started having a segment of veterans coming back. And it was also then as the Vietnam veterans were getting older. And you had this kind of crossroads. And there was, I think, the level of care, the level of whether it was care for the medical needs or whether it was psychiatric care or post-traumatic stress or suicide prevention, faltered a little in that window of time. Now, I believe we have seen an improvement in that. I do think we have. And particularly as we've gone on and now we've tasked this military that we have today with, I think, demands that none of us would have ever imagined. We would take such a small force and ask them to do so many things. But it's, I think the Congress and the President, the administration, now look at this because the public supports it. I mean, you don't have the public saying, I don't want veterans being properly funded for their health care or for their, whatever services they need.
Yes.
And so, quite frankly, the public responds to that. I mean, they respond to it, and their elected officials do. So we can have disagreements sometimes about maybe how we want to spend the money, but it's not whether or not we're going to spend it to take care of them.
Do elected officials, do you feel like that elected officials now listen, like when you're saying you was out of Congress 15 years ago? Do you think they listen now like they did back when you were there? Have we gone too far with it that we can't, if you will, make a deal?
Yeah, I can't speak to it too directly. Being a part of the judicial system, we kept our nose out of politics, so
Sure.
I'm not rubbing elbows with members of Congress.
Things have changed.
Very often.
Things have changed.
It's changed. One thing I guess I've picked up on is we've had the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying that maybe the most critical threat to America in terms of defense and so on is the deficit. I mean, it's a budget issue. If this country does not have a strong economy, we can't support a strong defense system. And this budget business has gotten very serious. And if Congress is not, prepared to pay what it costs to maintain the national parks and the highway system and things like that, with
military forces and
military forces with taxation, veterans get caught up in some of that dispute, and I think that's tragic. But it's kind of a sad reality. And I think one other thing that happened is at one point we were told there were empty beds in the veterans hospitals, and this ought to be used for maybe even family members and some expansion of veterans programs, and Congress wasn't able to do that. And I don't know if any of those issues linger and affect the outlook or not, but in any event, I remember some of these things coming up at the time that I served.
Yeah, there are a lot of veterans I'm finding right here in Wayne County that are totally unaware of what services are available to them as veterans. And I kind of fault our services for that, and that there needs to be some kind of follow-up program, you know.
Well, I think,
I always look at this and I say, you know, when the number of people leaving military service every year is so small relative to the population of this great nation.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to say, can't we just assign, you know, Al, we're going to assign you to Joe Smith over there, and
I like that.
Yeah.
you know,
I like that idea.
you may not have anything to do with him because Joe Smith figured out how to get a job and get his family moved into a house and his life stabilized after he left service to the country in the military. Or, you know, you may be working on Joe Smith for the next 5 years while you get him through his PTSD counseling
right,
and get him
Sure.
to school and get him educated and you know. But we're going to assign somebody, and there's such a small number, and I guess we try to do that in a way, but we do it through VSOs, veteran service officers
right.
in the service organizations, and we do it through, you know, counselors at VA, and we do it through, you know, the first sergeant in the reserve unit as he's trying to counsel a guy out. But maybe it needs a little more direct impact.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of things I would add. We had
good.
every county in the area I represented had a veteran service officer or shared one with a neighboring county, and that was important in reaching out. Another problem that we had is I represented a very rural area that was parts of it sparsely populated, and veterans would have to travel a day, you know, get up at 4 in the morning or something to make an appointment, and if they weren't driving themselves, they'd have to fit into a van, a carpool arrangement. And in more recent years, we've established some clinics in rural areas so that health care is more accessible and other services for veterans. And sometimes I think the VAs even had contracts with local clinics and provided care, and that's been important in making things available.
Yeah, yeah. We have a pretty good, our VSO, our veteran service officer, he's a
Right.
premium guy. He really is. But the problem still remains that there are a number of folks who just don't know even that he exists. You know. So going back on your idea, sir, I like that idea of some kind of assignment protocol or something that could be implemented for exiting military personnel. Maybe even a cooperative agreement between the services and the local VFWs, VSOs.
American Legion
Yeah,
officers.
American, right. Maybe a small little budget.
And quite frankly, what I've found in that is it's not so much that I'm going to demand that Al do a lot of work to help that young service member, but Al, I'm going to ask him to be there to answer the phone.
Sure.
Or be there to ask him, have you got this taken care of?
Sure.
And maybe you'll have to give them a little guidance. Maybe they've got all the guidance, they just need the right push.
Right.
But you know, they're making a transition from really an environment where they had you know, their life was significantly different than becoming a civilian.
Yes, yes.
I mean, there's
yes.
anybody that served in the military
Yes,
knows that.
yes.
It's not the same.
Yes, it's totally different.
And but yet, a whole lot of us make a successful transition, even if we've had injuries or if we've had PTSD. I mean, you know, I suffer from some of those things myself, and so, but managed to get through it. Well, the vast majority of us manage to get through it. It's just, do we get through it as easily as we ought to?
Well, the younger generation, I mean, you see that more and more where it's difficult for them to get through that. You know, in the service clubs, we try to get more and more young people involved in the service clubs. You know, the VFW, frankly, is more about helping the community as much as they can. I mean, this VFW in town, I've been involved with it for 5 or 6 years now, and I've always said, and will continue to say, we need to get out in the community, get out in the block if we have to, and start telling people what we do. If we're going to live in our little cave, nobody's going to know that, for crying out loud.
You know,
so get out and tell people that.
44 years ago,
wow.
we quit drafting anybody to be in our military forces. Right. So we have an all-volunteer force. Everybody there, everybody serving, whether you're a National Guardsman, reservist, active, I mean, you can be a Navy SEAL or a truck driver, you're all a volunteer.
Right.
Now, when we did that, we kind of have to take on a different responsibility, but we also found out you had a thinner and thinner segment of the population who would choose to serve, and they would serve for longer periods of time, and because quite frankly the military required it. We needed you to be better trained, better educated to carry on your role.
Correct.
So one of the things I'm always telling veterans is I said, folks, I don't care what you did in the service, and I don't care when you did it or where you did it, and I don't really care if you don't want to talk about some of it or not, but I'd really like you to at least tell your friends or tell your kids or tell your wife, you know, I was a truck driver in the 1st Air Cav, and I was in Vietnam, 50 years ago. Oh, okay. That's all. I mean, and let them ask you if they want to ask you, and you can tell them whatever you want to. But what I'm afraid we're missing is the public now doesn't have a face. If the 4 of us walked in the room, the public would look at us and maybe they'd see my little Marine Corps pin, or maybe they'd see your flag and think, well, maybe that guy was in the service. But, this is what a veteran looks like.
Yeah.
And we need the public to recognize that. The veteran's also 20-some years old going to class in here.
Yeah.
Or he's the 20-some year retired Army fellow that I met in one of the classes I went to yesterday. Or he's the person who served 6 years and went to Afghanistan and Iraq twice, and now they're here going to school to get a bachelor's degree.
I'd like to mention that I presented a program last week on my father's military service. And he was in a unit in World War II, infantry unit. They were on the front line in combat for over 100 days. And it was incredibly traumatic. They had in excess of 25% casualty. Over 50 people in a 100 or 1,000 person battalion were killed. And he had somebody killed right next to him. And he came back from that experience, and the only thing that I remember he ever mentioned is that he was in ski troop training, and here were the skis. He lost his sleeping bag in the Battle of the Bulge. I couldn't figure out, how could you lose your sleeping bag? And then I learned more about the Battle of the Bulge, and was thankful he even survived.
Yes. Yeah.
And he had a Luger pistol hidden away in a closet that he had been allowed to bring home. And I would look at that with fascination. But nothing about the horrors of the war, the experiences, the effect on him. And he died 30 years ago, and I don't know to this day really what the impact was. And he never went to a VA facility during his lifetime. So it was this silence, and I think that was characteristic of many of the veterans that were in these combat situations.
I had a young man who worked for me on one of my campaigns, and his dad was the age to be a World War II veteran. And literally, this young man only knew all he could tell me was his dad was a Marine. His dad liked me. I was a Marine. I was a veteran. I'd been in the war. His dad had been in the war. That was all he needed. And I had Bob Dole come out to do a fundraising event for me. And we stopped by the campaign office just so that he could meet all these volunteers that had been working on the campaign. And after we talked for a few minutes, well, Bob Dole is obviously this guy's peer. Well, this fellow came to the event. And after we didn't have any rope lines or anything, they could come up and visit with us. And Bob Dole and I were standing there, and this man came up and talked to Bob Dole. And here's Bob, and I asked him, I'm a Marine. I asked him, who'd you serve with? He said, I was with 1st Marine Division. Bob said, well, when did you serve? And he said, well, I went in 1940. And all of a sudden, just because of what I knew of the war and what I knew of the Marine Corps, his son was standing right behind us listening to this conversation. And that was the only way he ever found out. His dad had gone in the Marine Corps just before the war started and had stayed in the 1st Marine Division through the entire war and survived.
Wow.
He was landed at Guadalcanal, but he never knew that. Just like your dad. You found out figuring this out. He had the same thing with his dad, and his dad had never told him anything about it other than, I was a Marine in World War II.
And that may be a reason why a lot of the folks coming out of the service who've had these experiences don't connect, because they don't want to relive that, and they figure that, that they just rekindle those feeling
Yeah,
sometimes.
Well,
you know,
another thing that's happened is that as healthcare coverage has improved, unless they have a service-connected disability,
That's true too, yeah.
they're finding that they have insurance or other coverage, Medicare, that is providing for them acceptable healthcare service.
Yeah.
And when you live in a rural area and you
a
have
good
to
point. I
travel
thought
to
about
get
that.
to a VA facility, and you have coverage otherwise, you think, well, why would I need to spend a day when I can do this in an hour?
Yeah, but critical, I didn't think it to be as critical as you mentioned. When people get out of the service and you come back into the civilian environment, it's a totally different thing. I mean, it's a totally different atmosphere. And I know when I came out, I was fortunate enough to have some connection with some people who had prior military service and helped me through school and that kind of thing. But that doesn't happen to the majority. And I think that maybe we need to look at, and you gentlemen are in a better position than I am to maybe look at something like this and make it happen, but maybe upon discharge, maybe someone ought to give a personal visit to those folks, just like we do when somebody dies or somebody gets wounded, or maybe somebody ought to give them a personal visit at their home and kind of just follow up and check on them.
That's that connection. That when you leave the service, how does somebody on the other side know to make the personal visit?
Yeah.
Somebody's got to tell them.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to help connect those two.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, it might be a short, inconsequential visit, no help needed, or it might be something that turns into a much more difficult situation that you've got to help somebody work through. I know that the thing that I have found, and especially with veterans, and much like you talked about, or like your dad not wanting to talk about things he experienced, frequently if you were in a war, you may have experienced things that, one, are not normal, and two, you don't ever want to experience again. And whatever it was, your life was changed by that event.
Yes.
Now, you may look the same on the outside.
Yes.
And you may go on to a successful career. But that change that you had impacts the way you behave and the way you act to other people in your surrounding, whether it's your family or your community.
Right.
And I think the biggest part is I want people who see veterans, but they're looking at them all day long and don't know they're looking at them. So I'd just like the veteran to stick his hand up and say, well, I served in the Army from 82 to 88. Oh, well, that's great. Who'd you serve with? Well, I was with so-and-so. Great. What'd you do? Well, I was a truck driver, or I was a cannon cocker, or whatever. And no more than that. And yet now when they look at this person, one of the things that our little local VA hospital is doing, which I think is fabulous, they've got, I think 25% of the employees at that hospital served in the military in one form or another, men and women. Well, all over the walls of the hospital, they've got little things hanging on the wall, and it'll be a picture, and it shows, an old guy like me, and then there's a picture of some young stud, new second lieutenant, and then a little paragraph that says, Kuykendall's an orderly on this area, and that works in this department, and he served in the Marine Corps from this year to this year. That's and here, so all of a sudden, people even walking around notice, oh, so that's what an old veteran looks like. He looks like Kuykendall, or he looks like you, or he looks like you.
Yeah.
Now, he doesn't look like Dave, but Dave's a great representative and an empathetic member to the cause.
Yeah, but I had an incident. I was in Indianapolis, and I was driving past. I was at the light, and there was a guy standing there, and he had a sign. He says, "I'm a veteran, and I need some help." So I rolled down the window, and I said, "Hey," "you're a vet?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Where did you serve?" He said, "I was in Oklahoma." I said, "Oh, yeah?" I said, "What unit were you in?" I said, "What was your MOS?" He couldn't answer any of those questions.
And you realized quickly that
I said, "You're a fraud." And those kind of people just irritate.
Oh, they do. And that happens. And that's the
they trade on the.
And what's so interesting is those of us, unfortunately or fortunately, those of us that have served, usually one of the first questions I ever ask anybody that identifies themselves as a veteran says, what unit were you in?
That's right.
And if that doesn't just
come right out,
come right
it's
out.
got to be and within about 30 seconds of that is, and what kind of job do you have? Well, it was an 0311. And well, okay, what's that mean?
Yeah.
Well, we'll figure
Yeah.
But it's real quick like, and yet many people might not understand that. And yeah, you could have had a veteran who served in Oklahoma and he was in the National Guard, you know?
Yes, that's right.
And he spent 8 years in the National Guard
Yes,
there, and he was lucky enough he never had to deploy.
Right.
Well, he's absolutely qualified as a veteran. He served his country. He did it at a time we just didn't happen to need him to fight a war.
Right. But he would have known his MOS.
He would have known his MOS.
He would have known
what units.
Yeah.
Even if he never left Oklahoma.
That's right.
We're down to
man,
right down
time is
to it
flying.
again,
I
and the
know.
time is
Gee
moving
whiz.
so fast. I think we could sit here and talk for another hour anyway, don't you think?
Yeah.
Just
Yes,
miss
yes.
lunch and stay here and talk.
I'm
Well, I
ready
don't
for
know
lunch.
about that.
Though.
Do you have lunch coming?
Well, listen, we've sure
This has
enjoyed
certainly
this
been an
today.
honor,
This has
gentlemen.
really
Yeah.
been enjoyable.
Well, thank you
and-
for the
and,
opportunity.
we just need more time, but the director says a half hour is all we get. So
That's
with
good.
that, we're going to sign off, and thank you again for watching another session of Proudly We Served. And Ron, do you want to say goodbye?
Yes, and well, thank you, gentlemen, again for taking time to come by and be with us here.
Thank you.
Proudly we serve.
Yeah, we really
We
enjoyed
appreciate it very much.
We really
Thank you
enjoyed
very
it.
much,
Yeah.
sir. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, folks,
Thanks.
and we'll see you
See ya.
next time here at Proudly We Serve.